journalists. Nick, I want to begin with your reaction to these cuts.
Oh, well, I mean, these are cuts in some of our biggest markets. Not that the size of the market really matters when there are cuts. Cuts are cuts and they hurt readers. I saw someone tweet today, a reporter tweeted that if you multiply the number of stories that a reporter will write in a given day or a given year, if you start to do that math, and you do that math across the Postmedia chain, given today's cuts, that number adds up to thousands of stories. And these aren't just sort of 500-word notations of the day's news. These are stories that matter to readers in communities. So when you subtract thousands of stories from newspapers or from any medium, readers are going to notice, and that hurts. The CAJ spends a lot of time thinking about this whenever there are layoffs in newsrooms, and we usually make a statement. We typically make a statement that kind of mourns the loss of those reporters and the stories they tell. It's the same story every time, and unfortunately today it's a really big number and obviously a big story.
A big number, but it's more than just the number of stories. We're also talking about a shrinking number in diversity of voices, and that's problematic in terms of a healthy democracy.
That's hugely problematic. You have fewer voices. You're right, not just fewer stories, but fewer perspectives on those stories, and you also have more stories for a shrinking number of journalists to tell. And again, it's the same voices telling those stories. So that's absolutely also obviously a huge deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I will say that there is new media that is emerging, and certainly the industry is trying to embrace digital, and more people are democratizing the process. But there is something to be said about journalists who actually know the subject matter deeply and actually are funded and have the time to actually comment and report on a story.
Absolutely. But I think no matter who you lose in a newsroom, you're sending them a bad message to journalists. If you lose a senior journalist, then you lose the kind of institutional memory that can really drive a story forward in a newsroom and kind of bring a story meeting to life and bring eventually the story to life on paper or on, over radio or TV. And so if you lose that, you lose just a certain depth. If you lose a young journalist, then you're telling young journalists that there really isn't room for them in that little corner of this industry. And when you see that at a number of chains and publications and properties across the industry, then it becomes a trend. And that's not a new trend, unfortunately, but no matter what happens, whether it's losing the younger people in the newsroom, the older, or both, it hurts deeply.
I wonder, because in the past the government has looked at media concentration and asked questions about what it actually means for Canada in future. Is this something the government needs to get involved in again?
Well, it's something that I think the CAJ really has to talk about among ourselves. We do talk about it from time to time, and it's time to consider it again. We did talk about this when Postmedia announced its intention to purchase the Sun papers. We thought and we weren't alone. We weren't nearly alone thinking this, but we thought that it would lead to less media diversity, and it would lead to fewer voices, it would lead to fewer jobs, and it might lead to things like merged newsrooms, which we've just learned today is going to happen across some of these larger papers. So that's certainly something that we may call on the government to think about.
Nick, thank you about that. That is Nick Taylor-Vaisey. He is the president of the Canadian Association of Journalists.